Single mom sat alone at a wedding when a ruthless mafia boss claimed her hand for one dance. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Sarah Miller sat alone at the wedding reception, the soft hum of chatter and clinking glasses around her creating a buzz that felt distant, almost muffled. At 32, she had learned to embrace solitude, especially in situations like this. A single mom, she had become accustomed to missing out on the fleeting joys of life. The wedding was supposed to be a brief escape from her daily grind, an invitation from an old college friend she had barely kept in touch with. The grand ballroom, filled with the sparkling lights of chandeliers and the laughter of the guests, seemed like another world to Sarah. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her back, and her navy blue dress clung softly to her figure, a stark contrast to the polished perfection of the people around her. She wasn't looking for a date or attention, just a quiet moment away from the responsibilities that defined her life. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Dominic Romano, the man who had been the subject of many whispers throughout the room, made his entrance. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit that screamed wealth and power, he cut through the crowd with an air of undeniable authority. His gaze, sharp and calculating, swept the room before landing on Sarah. She tried to focus on her glass of wine, willing herself to blend into the background, but the weight of his eyes made it impossible. It wasn't the kind of look that made you feel seen. It made you feel like you were being studied, measured. Dominic had a reputation, one that Sarah had heard bits and pieces of in hushed conversations. A ruthless mafia boss, feared by many but admired by those who followed him. His presence was magnetic, yet suffocating, and as he approached her, the buzz of the room seemed to fade completely. "May I have this dance?" His voice was low, smooth, with an accent she couldn't place. It wasn't a request. It was a command wrapped in the politest of phrases. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't prepared for this. For him. She looked up, meeting his gaze, and for the first time that night, she felt as though everything around her had gone still. The people, the music, the noise, it all faded, leaving just the two of them standing at the center of the world. Her instincts screamed to decline, to walk away, but there was something in his eyes, something dangerous yet oddly captivating. I'm not sure," she began, but before she could finish, Dominic gently but firmly took her hand, his fingers closing around hers with surprising tenderness. "I insist," he said, his tone unwavering. The room seemed to hold its breath as he led her to the dance floor. Sarah's mind raced, her body moved almost instinctively, guided by his confident steps. The music shifted into a slow, classical tune, and they were surrounded by other couples, but it felt as though they were the only two people in the room. As they danced, the space between them closed, and Sarah could feel the warmth of his hand on her back, the strength in his movements. There was no room for hesitation. She couldn't look away from him, and for reasons she couldn't fully understand, she didn't want to. In that moment, everything she thought she knew about her life, the quiet, steady rhythm of motherhood, the unspoken promise she had made to herself to always keep her guard up, seemed so far away. It was just her and Dominic, two souls who, for one dance, were bound by something unspoken, something that neither of them could quite grasp. She wasn't sure what it was, but she could feel it, the undeniable pull, the silent agreement that she was no longer alone in that moment. As the music swirled around them, Sarah felt her pulse quicken, her breath growing shallow. Dominic led her effortlessly across the dance floor, his grip firm yet gentle. She could feel the weight of his presence, his every move deliberate and calculated. There was something magnetic about him, something that made it impossible for her to look away. As they glided across the floor, Sarah tried to focus on the music, on the steady beat that kept them in sync, but her mind kept drifting back to the man beside her. His every movement was smooth, like he had been born to lead, to command attention. Sarah had never been in a situation like this before, not with someone like him. Dominic Romano was not a man to be taken lightly. He was the kind of person whose name carried weight, who left a mark on everyone he encountered. As they danced, she couldn't help but wonder what he saw in her. She was just a single mom from Queens, working multiple jobs, trying to make ends meet. Why would someone like him be interested in someone like her? "You're a very good dancer," Dominic said, his voice low and smooth, almost a whisper in her ear. The proximity of his voice sent a shiver down her spine, but she forced herself to smile, unsure of how to respond. "Thank you," she said, her voice betraying her nerves. "I don't really dance much." Dominic's eyes locked onto hers, his gaze intense. "You should. You have a natural grace. It's a rare thing," he said, his words lingering in the air between them. Sarah felt her heart race, and she quickly turned her gaze to the floor, unable to hold his stare any longer. The truth was, she wasn't sure what to think of Dominic. There was something unnerving about the way he watched her, like he could see right through her, like he knew things she hadn't even said out loud. She could feel the tension building between them, but she didn't know if it was the kind of tension that came from a connection, or if it was just the weight of his power pressing down on her. As the song came to an end, Dominic didn't immediately release her. Instead, he took a step closer, his body almost touching hers. The warmth of him made her acutely aware of just how close they were, and she could feel the rapid beating of her heart in her chest. "Would you like to get some air?" he asked, his voice now a little lower, almost inviting. Sarah hesitated, her mind racing. She wasn't sure if she should say yes, if it was a good idea to be alone with him. But there was something about the way he looked at her, something that made her feel both intrigued and uneasy at the same time. Before she could answer, Dominic gently guided her toward the balcony, where the cool night air hit them like a breath of fresh air. The lights of the city sparkled in the distance, and for a moment, it was just the two of them, standing in the quiet. Dominic leaned against the railing, his eyes still on her, waiting for her to speak. "This is beautiful," Sarah said, finally breaking the silence. "It is," Dominic replied, his gaze never leaving her face. "But not nearly as beautiful as you." The compliment caught Sarah off guard, and she found herself speechless for a moment. She didn't know how to respond. Was he being sincere? Or was it just another of his charming, calculated moves? She had no idea. But there was something in his eyes, something that made her feel like she was in over her head. "You're not like the others," Dominic said, his voice suddenly serious. "You don't play games." Sarah felt a flush rise to her cheeks. She wasn't sure if it was the way he looked at her or the words he used, but they both made her feel exposed in a way she wasn't used to. "I don't play games," she said, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions swirling inside her. "I just want to be real." Dominic smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made her feel like he was reading her every thought. "I like that," he said softly. "Real is rare." Sarah wasn't sure how to respond. She wasn't sure what Dominic wanted from her, or what he saw in her, but one thing was clear. She wasn't going to be able to walk away from this encounter without it changing her life forever. The air outside on the balcony was crisp, the city lights twinkling in the distance as Sarah stood next to Dominic, her mind racing. She had barely known this man for a few hours, yet it felt as though she had known him much longer. The way he looked at her, with those intense, dark eyes, seemed to peel away the layers of her life, leaving her feeling exposed in a way she wasn't accustomed to. "I don't usually open up to people like this," Sarah said quietly, her voice betraying the uncertainty she felt. "You don't have to," Dominic replied, his tone reassuring yet firm. "I can see everything I need to see in you, Sarah." She wasn't sure if she should be flattered or unsettled by his words, but his confidence was undeniable, and it made her feel like she was being drawn into a world she wasn't ready for. She shifted uncomfortably, looking out at the skyline, trying to gather her thoughts. The wind tugged at her hair, and she absently reached up to push a loose strand behind her ear. "Why are you so different?" Sarah asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. Dominic's eyes never left her face as he took a step closer. "Because I'm not like the men you're used to," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I don't waste time with small talk or games. When I want something, I take it." The words hung in the air between them, and Sarah felt a strange mix of apprehension and intrigue. She wasn't used to men being so direct, so unapologetically confident. It was both refreshing and intimidating. "I'm not interested in anything from you," she said, her voice firm, though her heart was beating faster than she cared to admit. Dominic chuckled softly, the sound smooth and almost affectionate. I don't need you to be interested in me, Sarah. I need you to trust me. Trust him? The words echoed in her mind, and she found herself wondering how she could trust someone she barely knew, especially someone like Dominic. But there was something in the way he carried himself, something magnetic and undeniably powerful, that made her question everything she thought she knew about herself. She didn't know what it was, but she felt like she was being pulled into his orbit, and no matter how hard she tried to resist, she couldn't seem to pull away. I don't know if I can do that, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic stepped closer, the distance between them almost non-existent now. I'm not asking for your trust, Sarah. I'm offering you a choice. You can walk away from this, from me, and go back to your life. Or you can stay, and let me show you what it means to live without fear. The words hit her like a wave, and she found herself frozen, unsure of how to respond. She had lived her whole life playing it safe, keeping her head down and doing what was necessary to survive. But now, with Dominic standing in front of her, everything felt different. And what would that look like? She asked, her voice tinged with doubt. Dominic's gaze softened, and for a moment, he seemed almost human. It means you'll never have to be afraid again. I'll protect you, Sarah. You'll have everything you've ever wanted. Sarah shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. This wasn't the life she had imagined for herself. It wasn't the life she wanted for her daughter. But the more she looked at Dominic, the more she felt herself torn between the life she knew and the one he was offering her. She had always prided herself on being strong, on being independent. But with Dominic, it felt as though she was standing at the edge of something unknown, something dangerous yet exciting. I don't know if I can trust you, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Dominic reached out, his hand brushing against her arm in a gesture that was unexpectedly tender. You don't have to trust me right now. All I'm asking is that you let me show you what's possible. His words hung in the air, and for a moment, Sarah thought she might collapse under the weight of them. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready for him. But deep down, a part of her knew she wouldn't be able to walk away from him, not now. Not when he made her feel like she could finally take control of her life, like she didn't have to carry the weight of the world alone anymore. The air between Sarah and Dominic felt charged, as if the world around them had disappeared, leaving only the two of them standing in the quiet of the night. She wasn't sure what to make of everything he had said. His words lingered in her mind, twisting and turning in her thoughts. Could she trust him? Was this all just a game to him? Or was there something real behind the power he so effortlessly wielded? I'm not sure what you expect from me, Sarah said, her voice softer now, still unsure but willing to engage with him. Dominic's eyes softened as he looked at her. I don't expect anything from you, Sarah. I'm just offering you a choice. His voice was calm, like he was stating a simple fact, yet it carried the weight of an unspoken promise. And if I choose to stay? Sarah asked, looking up at him, her heart racing. Dominic took a step closer, his presence overwhelming but strangely comforting. If you choose to stay, I will give you a life without fear. A life where you don't have to fight every day to survive. A life where you and your daughter can have everything you deserve. His words hit her like a wave, leaving her breathless. She had worked so hard for everything she had, but what he was offering was something she couldn't deny, something she had never imagined for herself. She looked away, trying to gather her thoughts. I've never had a life like that, she said quietly, almost to herself. And I'm not sure I'm ready for one. Dominic reached out, his hand gently touching her arm. You don't have to be ready, Sarah. Life doesn't wait for us to be ready. It's about taking chances, about trusting in something bigger than ourselves. Sarah's eyes met his, and for the first time, she felt like she was looking at something more than just a man with power. She saw a man who, despite his cold exterior, seemed to genuinely care. She wasn't sure if it was the vulnerability she saw in him, or the way he spoke to her as though he could protect her, but something inside her shifted. What if I can't trust you? Sarah asked, her voice small, almost fearful. Dominic's expression softened, and he took a deep breath, as if weighing his words carefully. Trust doesn't come easy, but I can show you that I'm not like the others, Sarah. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to protect you. All I ask is for you to give me a chance. Sarah felt the weight of his words settle over her like a blanket. It was a strange feeling, this sense of being cared for, but it wasn't just about care. It was about security, about not having to constantly watch her back, about not having to be the strong one all the time. And for once, it felt like she could let go. She took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, the tension in her body slowly easing. "I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not the kind of woman who needs someone to protect her." Dominic gave her a knowing smile, his eyes filled with understanding. "You're not alone in this anymore, Sarah. You don't have to do it all by yourself." His words were a lifeline, and though she didn't fully understand why, she felt herself reaching for it. There was something in his offer, something she couldn't resist, even if it scared her. She had spent so many years protecting herself and her daughter, doing everything on her own. But what if there was a way to live without constantly carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders? She looked at Dominic again, and this time, she didn't look away. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I know," he said softly, his voice low and reassuring. "But you don't have to be. Not with me." The night air seemed to grow colder, but Sarah felt warmth in his words, a promise of something more. She didn't know where this path would lead, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life was about to change in a way she couldn't yet comprehend. And for the first time in a long time, she was willing to let it happen. The next few days passed in a blur, the world around Sarah feeling like a dream, a life she was both drawn to and terrified of. Dominic's offer lingered in her mind, the promise of security and protection tugging at her heart, yet her instincts screamed at her to be cautious. She had never allowed herself to rely on anyone but herself, and now, standing on the edge of something unknown, she was unsure if she was ready to take that step. The thought of her daughter, Emma, kept her grounded. Emma, with her bright blue eyes and endless curiosity, was the one thing Sarah could never put at risk. But could Dominic really offer the safety he claimed? Or was it all just a clever trap to pull her deeper into his world? Sarah spent her days working, her nights thinking. She tried to focus on her job, on the small clinic where she helped others, but her mind constantly drifted back to Dominic. He was everywhere, even in the quiet moments, even when she was alone with her thoughts. On the third evening after their meeting, Dominic called her. His voice was calm, smooth, as always, but there was something in the way he said her name that made her heart race. "Sarah," he said, his tone steady but urgent, "I need to see you. There's something important we need to discuss." The words were simple, but the weight behind them made her feel as if she had no choice but to agree. She had been waiting for him to call, but now that it was happening, she was flooded with doubt. Was she making a mistake? What was she really stepping into? "I'll be there," she said, her voice almost a whisper, betraying the uncertainty she felt inside. She hung up the phone and took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. As she got ready, she glanced at Emma, who was playing in the living room, oblivious to the turmoil Sarah was feeling. Sarah had always tried to protect her daughter from the darker aspects of life, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized she couldn't shield her from everything. Not forever. She had to make a choice, and tonight would be the first step. When she arrived at the lavish estate, the gates opened smoothly, almost as if they were expecting her. The mansion loomed ahead, its lights casting long shadows on the manicured grounds. Sarah felt the weight of her decision settling into her chest. She was standing at the threshold of something she couldn't turn back from, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure what she was about to find on the other side. The door opened before she could knock, and there he was, Dominic. As always, he looked like he belonged in a world far removed from hers. His tailored suit fit perfectly, his posture commanding, and those dark eyes of his met hers with a mixture of intensity and something else, something softer, though she couldn't quite place it. "Sarah," he greeted her, his voice low but warm. "I'm glad you came." She nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady despite the nerves she felt. Dominic stepped aside, allowing her to enter. "Come in," he said, his hand gesturing toward the hallway. "There's something I need you to understand, something about the life I lead, the world I'm offering you." Sarah followed him inside, the door closing softly behind them. The interior of the mansion was as grand as she had imagined, every detail meticulously chosen to reflect power and wealth. But it wasn't the luxury that caught her attention. It was the feeling of being in a place where everything was controlled, where every inch was planned. It was the kind of place where things happened according to someone else's rules, not hers. Dominic led her into a room at the back of the house, a study that overlooked the garden. He motioned for her to sit, and she did so, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I'm not here to pressure you," he began, his gaze never leaving her. "But I need you to understand what I can offer you. I know you've been through a lot. I've been watching, and I know the sacrifices you've made for your daughter. I respect that." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "You've been watching me?" she asked, surprised by his admission. He nodded, his expression serious. "I don't do things halfway, Sarah. When I make an offer, I make sure it's the right one. I've seen your strength, your loyalty. But I also know that you're tired. You don't have to carry everything on your own anymore." His words struck her deeply, cutting through the walls she had built around herself. She had always felt like she was alone in the world, that she had to protect Emma, provide for her, and never let anyone see her weaknesses. But here, in this moment, Dominic's offer felt real. She could feel the weight of his words, and though part of her wanted to resist, another part of her, the part that had been running on empty for so long, wanted to believe him. "What are you asking me to do?" Sarah asked, her voice quiet, almost afraid of the answer. Dominic smiled, a rare softness in his eyes. "I'm asking you to trust me, Sarah. I'm asking you to let me help you, to let me be there for you. In this world, you can either fight alone, or you can let someone fight beside you." Sarah sat back in her chair, her mind racing with possibilities. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure what was right. But one thing was clear, her life was about to change, and she had to decide whether she was ready to let it happen. As Sarah sat there in the quiet, the weight of Dominic's words hung in the air. She had never felt more torn in her life. He was offering her something that seemed impossible, a way out of the exhausting cycle she had been in for so long. It was so tempting, but at the same time, it felt like a risk she wasn't sure she was ready to take. Dominic watched her carefully, his gaze never wavering, giving her space to think, but also letting her know that he was waiting for an answer. "You don't have to decide right now," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper, as though he could sense the inner turmoil she was feeling. "But you should know that this opportunity won't wait forever. I can't promise you that everything will be easy, but I can promise you that I will make sure you and your daughter are safe." Sarah's thoughts were a whirlwind. She had always prided herself on being independent, doing everything on her own, and never asking for help. But Dominic was offering her something different: protection, security, a chance to stop fighting every day. She had worked so hard to give Emma a better life, but the weight of her responsibilities was taking its toll. The idea of having someone like Dominic by her side was almost too good to be true. But then, doubts crept in. She couldn't forget the world he came from, the dangerous world of power and secrecy. What would it cost her? What would it cost Emma? She was willing to do anything to keep her daughters safe, but could she trust Dominic to truly protect them, or would his world draw them into something darker? "I don't know what to think," Sarah admitted, her voice quiet, almost breaking. "I've always been the one to take care of everything, to make sure nothing goes wrong. I don't know how to let go of that." Dominic nodded, his expression understanding. "I know it's hard to trust someone else with that kind of responsibility, but you don't have to carry it all alone, Sarah. You don't have to do it all by yourself. You've been doing that for so long, and look where it's gotten you. It's not weakness to accept help. It's strength." His words hit her harder than she expected. She had never thought about it that way. She had always seen asking for help as a sign of weakness, a failure to handle things on her own. But now, in the quiet of Dominic's study, surrounded by the weight of his offer, she realized that maybe he was right. Maybe it wasn't weakness, it was survival. Maybe letting go of some control, letting someone else take on some of the weight, wasn't a bad thing. It didn't mean she was failing. It meant she was trying to make things better, for herself and for Emma. "I've been so afraid," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Afraid of what would happen if I let go. Afraid of what it would mean for Emma." Dominic's gaze softened, and he stepped closer to her, his presence steady and comforting. "I understand your fear, Sarah. But sometimes, the fear of what we don't know is worse than the reality. I'm not asking you to throw away everything you've worked for. I'm asking you to let me help you build something better, something safer." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had spent so many years protecting Emma, keeping her safe from the world, but the world wasn't getting any easier. Maybe it was time to let someone else help. Someone who could offer more than just words. Someone who could offer a way out. She looked at Dominic, meeting his gaze, and for the first time, she felt a small flicker of hope. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice steady, though she knew the decision was already beginning to form in her mind. Dominic smiled, the corners of his mouth curling up in a rare, warm smile. "That's all I ask," he said softly. "Take your time. But know that I'm here whenever you're ready." Sarah stood up, the uncertainty still lingering but no longer overwhelming. She had a choice to make, and she wasn't alone in making it. She had never felt this way before, like the weight of the world wasn't entirely on her shoulders. Maybe, just maybe, she could take the next step and let someone else help carry it for a while. Days passed, and Sarah couldn't shake the weight of her decision. She had spent her entire life trying to protect Emma, to keep her world simple, controlled, safe. But Dominic's offer had sparked something inside her, a desire for a different life. One where she didn't have to fight every day just to stay afloat. She spent each night replaying their conversation in her head, analyzing his words, trying to figure out if he was truly someone she could trust. She had seen how easily he navigated his world, how everyone around him deferred to his power, but there was something different in the way he looked at her. It wasn't just the cold authority he commanded. It was the way he seemed to understand her, to see her. It unsettled her, but also made her question the life she had built. Was she really doing the best she could for Emma, or was she holding them both back by clinging to the safety of the familiar? Dominic's words echoed in her mind, and she realized that she had been afraid of trusting someone else, afraid of letting go of the control that had defined her for so long. But maybe it was time to let someone else take the lead, just for once. The next evening, Sarah made her decision. She hadn't told anyone, especially not Emma. She didn't know how to explain the weight of it all to her daughter, or even if she could. But deep down, she knew that she couldn't keep carrying the burden on her own. She had to take the chance. When Sarah arrived at Dominic's mansion that evening, she was greeted by the same sense of grandeur that had overwhelmed her the first time she stepped through the gates. But this time, she felt different. There was no hesitation in her steps, no second-guessing. She was here, and she had made up her mind. Dominic was waiting for her in the study, just like before. His dark eyes followed her as she entered, and he stood from behind his desk, a slight smile playing at the corners of his lips. "You came," he said, his voice steady but warm, as though he had expected nothing less. "I'm here," Sarah replied, her voice a little firmer than she felt. "I've thought about everything you said, and I'm ready. I'm ready to trust you." Dominic's smile deepened, and for a moment, Sarah saw something soft in his eyes, something that told her this wasn't just about power and control. There was sincerity there, and it made her feel a little lighter, a little less afraid. He stepped closer to her, his presence both overwhelming and comforting. "You won't regret this, Sarah," he said quietly, his voice full of certainty. "I'm not just offering you protection. I'm offering you a life where you don't have to live in fear anymore. I'm offering you a future where you and Emma can thrive, not just survive." His words, so simple yet so powerful, made Sarah's heart skip a beat. She had always lived in survival mode. Everything she did was for Emma, to give her the best possible future. But what if this was the opportunity she needed to truly give Emma a life worth living, one where they didn't have to constantly fight to stay afloat? Dominic reached out, his hand brushing gently against hers. It was a subtle gesture, but it felt like a promise. "We'll take this step by step, Sarah. No pressure. Just trust in the choices we make together. You're not alone in this." Sarah nodded, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. She wasn't alone anymore. She had someone who was offering her more than just empty words. She had someone who was ready to stand by her, to protect her and Emma in ways she never thought possible. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in years: hope. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Dominic's smile softened, and he nodded. "You don't have to thank me," he said, his tone reassuring. "This is just the beginning." As Sarah stood there, with Dominic by her side, she realized that everything was about to change. The world she had known, the world where she had fought every day to make it on her own, was gone. In its place was something new, something uncertain, but full of possibility. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she had someone she could trust, someone who could help her build a future for herself and Emma, one step at a time. The days that followed were both a blur and a new beginning for Sarah. With Dominic's offer hanging in the balance, she began to step into a life she had never imagined. It wasn't easy. There were moments when she second-guessed herself, wondering if she was making the right choice for her daughter, Emma. But as she walked through the door of her small apartment that night, the weight of Dominic's promise settled on her like a comforting cloak. She didn't have to do this alone anymore. Her world was changing, and so was she. The next morning, Sarah awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Emma, the little girl she loved more than anything. The first step was always the hardest, but today, Sarah had a new kind of strength. She had Dominic's word, and that, in itself, made her believe in a future she had never dared to dream of before. Later that day, she received a call from Dominic. It wasn't unexpected, but hearing his voice always had a certain effect on her. There was something undeniably magnetic about him, something that drew her in no matter how hard she tried to resist. "Sarah," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I need you to meet me tonight. There are some things we need to go over. It's time to take the next step." Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't realized how much she was waiting for him to reach out again, to take charge of the situation. But now, standing at the crossroads of her decision, she knew this was the moment that would define everything. "All right," she replied, her voice steady despite the excitement and fear bubbling inside her. "I'll be there." That evening, Sarah found herself standing at the door of a sleek, modern building in the heart of the city. Dominic had arranged for them to meet at one of his properties, a place she had never seen before. The elevator ride to the top floor was filled with a sense of anticipation, the hum of the machinery beneath her feet matching the rapid beat of her heart. When the doors opened, she was greeted by the vast, open space of the penthouse. The view of the city stretched before her like a shimmering sea of lights, and for a moment, she could almost forget everything else, the doubts, the fears, the life she had known before. Dominic stood by the windows, looking out over the city. His presence was commanding, as always. But there was something different about the way he held himself tonight. He turned when he heard her footsteps, his expression unreadable, yet somehow softer than it had been before. "You came," he said simply, his eyes scanning her face with that familiar intensity. "I did," Sarah replied, taking a step forward, her heart racing. "What are we doing here, Dominic? What's next?" Dominic walked toward her, his gaze never leaving hers. "What's next is you learning to trust me completely," he said, his voice low, yet filled with promise. "This is more than just an offer, Sarah. This is a new life for you and your daughter. One that's free from fear, free from the constant struggle. And it all starts tonight." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had heard these words before, but now, standing in this luxurious space with him, it felt like the moment of truth. She could walk away. She could say no and go back to the life she knew. Or she could step forward into this new world Dominic was offering, a world that seemed so far removed from everything she had ever known. "I'm ready," Sarah said, her voice steady, the decision finally clear in her mind. "I trust you." Dominic's eyes softened, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something like relief in his gaze. "You won't regret this, Sarah," he said, his tone sincere. "I'll make sure of that." As Sarah looked around the penthouse, at the life Dominic had built for himself, she knew that her world was forever changed. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. She had made her choice, and now it was time to move forward. The road ahead would be uncertain, but one thing was clear: she no longer had to walk it alone. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself adjusting to the new rhythm of her life. It was still difficult to let go of the old habits, the constant vigilance that had once been her armor. But with Dominic's reassurance, she slowly began to relax. She was still learning to trust him, but the more she allowed herself to, the more she realized how much of a difference it made. Dominic kept his word. He was there when she needed him, offering support without overstepping, making her feel like she wasn't alone anymore. He didn't push her into anything she wasn't ready for. He let her set the pace, respecting her boundaries while still showing her that he was committed to the promise he had made. One afternoon, as Sarah was picking Emma up from school, she received a call from Dominic. His voice, as usual, was calm and steady, but there was a new determination in his tone. Sarah, there's something I need you to do, he said. It's time to meet the people who are part of my world. They need to know that you're not just anyone to me. You're important. Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach at his words. She had been living in the shadow of Dominic's world, trying to keep her distance from the dangerous side of his life. But now, it seemed, she couldn't avoid it anymore. I don't know if I'm ready for that, she admitted, her voice betraying her uncertainty. Dominic's response was immediate. You are. Trust me, this is just a formality. It'll help them understand that you're not to be taken lightly. Sarah wasn't sure if she believed him, but something in his voice made her want to trust him. After a few moments of hesitation, she agreed. All right, I'll do it. That evening, she dressed carefully, choosing something simple yet elegant. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew it would be important. When she arrived at the venue, a sleek, private restaurant reserved for the most influential people in the city, Sarah couldn't help but feel out of place. The luxury of it all made her uneasy. Dominic was waiting for her inside, of course, and when he saw her, his eyes softened. You look beautiful, he said, his voice warm, but there was a hint of something else behind his words. Pride, perhaps, or a deeper connection. Sarah felt her cheeks flush. Thanks, she said, looking down at the floor. Are you ready? Dominic asked, his gaze shifting to the private room where his associates were waiting. Sarah nodded, even though she wasn't entirely sure if she was. Dominic led her inside, where a group of well-dressed men and women sat around a large, polished table. Their eyes immediately turned to Sarah as she entered, and she felt the weight of their gaze, each one assessing her in their own way. But when Dominic spoke, his voice carried authority. Everyone, this is Sarah, he said, his eyes never leaving her face. She's important to me, and I expect you all to treat her with the same respect you would show me. The room fell silent, and Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. It wasn't just the words he said, it was the way he said them. He was letting them know, in no uncertain terms, that she was not to be undermined. As they took their seats, Sarah tried to stay calm, but the tension in the room was palpable. These were people who lived in a world that was foreign to her, powerful, dangerous, and full of unspoken rules. But Dominic's presence was a steady anchor, and with him by her side, she began to feel like she could hold her ground. The meeting was quick, but it left an impression on Sarah. She could feel the shift in the way people looked at her afterward. There was no longer any doubt in their minds about her importance in Dominic's life. As they left the restaurant, Sarah felt both exhilarated and overwhelmed. She had stepped into a new world, one where power and influence were the currency, and she was no longer just an observer. Dominic walked beside her, his hand resting lightly on her lower back, guiding her through the crowd. How do you feel? He asked, his voice soft but carrying a note of concern. Sarah took a deep breath. I'm still processing it all, she said, her voice steady, though her mind was racing. But I think I'm starting to understand. Dominic smiled, a look of approval crossing his face. Good. You don't have to be perfect, Sarah. You just have to be yourself. His words were simple, yet they carried a weight that made her feel like she was finally starting to find her place in this new life. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be.